I am delighted to introduce Heather Rose and Ann Summers in conversation.
Good evening, everybody. And as you've heard, I was conscripted to this job at fairly short notice, but it was a great pleasure to do so, having already read Heather's book and as Elizabeth said, being a great fan. But I just want to clarify one thing. There's no way that I'm standing in for Marina. I wish I could, but there's no way that I could do that. My job tonight is to engage Heather in conversation about the book and about Marina, and we'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask Heather questions, and then there'll be some opportunities later on for mingling and for buying the book and having it signed. I was delighted to get the distress call, not because I'm very sorry, of course, that Marina is not well, but I was very pleased that I was able to step in at short notice because I'm such a fan of this book, and I enjoyed very much rereading it yesterday just to refresh my memory. And I thought what I'd do is we'll just have a few questions around 4 topics to do with the book. The first is we'll talk about the genesis of the novel. Secondly, we'll talk about what the novel actually is. Thirdly, we'll look at some of the characters in it. And then finally, I'll get Heather to talk about Marina herself. Is that okay with you?
That's perfect,
I haven't run these questions past Heather. We didn't really have time, so I hope it's going to work out okay. Just to start with the genesis of this book. I mean, we know, or many of us know, that it took you 11 years to write, which is quite long even by my standards. You'd already been working on this book, I think, for several years, and using another one of Marina Abramovic's work, Rhythm Zero, as the central theme, when in 2010 you took a change of direction that profoundly changed this work. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you came to leave the Apple Isle, Tasmania, where you live, for the Big Apple, for this very place where we sit tonight, this very spot it seems, and why that changed everything.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone for being here. It's so special for me to be here in New York and with so many of my loved ones here from Australia. I think that there are 28 people who flew in for this event. So I'm very touched, and I'm very touched by all of you who've made time and to see some familiar faces also from New York. So thank you. The book actually began back in 2005 at the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, and there was a show on that I went to see. I'm a great fan of art, and I went to see the Dutch Masters, and I wandered off and into another section of the gallery, and there was a black and white photograph, and beside it it said, "This is a show by the performance artist Marina Abramovic." It was 1974 in Naples, and it was called Rhythm Zero when she put the 72 items on the table. And then underneath that it said, Marina Abramovic is also known for a work called The Walk, where she and her partner Ulay walked from either end of the Great Wall of China to meet in the middle to say goodbye. And I was so stunned at the idea of someone who would have such courage, but also such a romantic spirit. And that got me thinking, and I started working on the novel, and in 2007 I was in Scotland at a little tiny hotel. I'd gone out to the Isle of Skye because I used to live there, and I went out for a little trip down memory lane at the end of another trip and was at a hotel on my own having dinner. And it was one of those excruciating moments when you're the single woman at the table and beside you there's a family of 4 and over here there's the romantic couple, and it's such a tiny hotel. They're the only people in the dining room with you, and they're doing their best to try and sort of ignore you, and you're trying to not let them feel uncomfortable that you're on your own. And the only menu that night was a degustation. So I was stuck there for quite a few courses. But suddenly the character I'd been thinking of, this fictional version that was inspired by the photograph, came to life across the other side of the table, and I knew what the novel was about. It was about her recalling all the people through each course that had had such a powerful impact on her life. And this was her last performance piece, and this was the night before. She didn't know it was her last performance piece, but this was her last performance piece. And these people appeared as ghosts and spectres across the other side of the table and had conversations with her. When I heard that there was going to be a show in 2010 in New York, I thought, oh, I have to go. And so I came here and I ran up the stairs and I stood in the queue, and then, of course, we waited. We all waited. Some of us waited a very long time for many, many, many days and months. And when I finally sat down at the blonde wood table that was literally here, I realised that she'd always been sitting at a table for 5 years. Well, you know, for 3 years, she'd been sitting at a table for me. And that's when I realised that I could never fictionalise her, that Marina was more magnetic, more powerful, and far too fascinating in herself to fictionalise her. Nothing I could do in my imagination would ever make up for what Marina is and has done with her life. And so then I had already arranged to have a meeting with her gallerist, Sean Kelly, who's unfortunately not able to be here tonight. But he suggested that if I wanted Marina to be a character in the book, that I could ask. And she said yes, with no caveats. Yet again, a woman of extraordinary courage and grace. And so the book changed right at that moment. But of course, the characters in many ways were already there because they were already sitting across the table from her. And the last character to fall into place, I went back to the Chelsea Hotel where I was staying that night. And for those of you who know the Chelsea Hotel, every room was entirely different in that hotel, yes? And the one I was staying in on that particular occasion had an upright piano. And I walked in the room and there was Archie sitting at the piano, the main character of the book, and he's a film composer. And I thought to myself, oh, not a film composer, because I know nothing about music. So then it went on.
Okay. I guess one question is, did the central character have to be a performance artist? I mean, could this have gone another way if you'd chosen a painter, for example? Or was it always going to be?
It was always her. It never changed. That never varied. And it's a good question because for those of you who are writers, sometimes those things are a bit flexible, but no, it was always her. And it was such a powerful book because that character and the construct of a life lived with true courage and a life lived for art compelled me through 11 years. And at the end of writing it, I was actually on a little island off Tasmania, and it's called Bruny Island. And I remember looking up from the table as I finished, and the title dropped in last. It was called The Atrium for a long, long time. And then right at the end, the publishers had said to me they wanted me to think of another title. And I was playing with titles, and I came up with the Museum of Modern Love because of thinking about MoMA, obviously. And I remember I put down my pen and I looked up and I thought, wow, if there really are muses who look after us, as there are in the book, if there are muses that look after all of us with our creative souls and our creative projects and our creative dreams, then this has been the most patient muse in the world.
Okay. Just looking at what the novel is, you have described, I read this morning, I think, you've described the book as a story of convergence. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us what you mean by that.
It felt to me that I wanted to try and capture the strangeness of life, at least in my experience of it, that things seem to unfold in magical and mysterious ways, and often quite wondrous ways, where we meet the right person, we have the right experience. We suddenly, especially as we get older, realise that all of our life is like a series of domino chips just waiting to fall in a certain order. And I'm fascinated by that in life. How is it that we do meet the right person, that we do come across the right piece of writing that inspires an idea, or we catch the wrong train but end up having the right view that teaches us something that we needed to know, or we come across a person who totally changes our life that we might never have met in any other circumstances. And I really love that, the way that this space here during 2010, because I sat here quite a lot and watched a lot of people sit too, how many people started to connect with each other. So there'd be young actors from NYU connecting with academics from other parts of the world and other parts of the country, having these extraordinary conversations. And there were beautiful, beautiful moments where people connected with each other. And the book was already edging in that direction, but it was only when Archie arrived and I realised that he was going to MoMA to really seek solace through this very dark hour of his life and dark hour of his marriage. And that, you know, it's easy to call it serendipity, but it seems to be something more powerful than that.
Well, I want to move on to talking about Archie, because you have said in an essay you wrote quite recently about the book that when you were recently reassessing your own life that you realised, and this is a quote, realised I had written a love letter to every woman who has dared to pursue her art, and that this is what the book is also about. And just as you say in the book of Marina as she nears the end of the walk across the Great Wall, and I'm quoting you here, she might have been another sort of woman. She might have had a child, been a mother, a wife, but she'd chosen not to. She wanted this life, this one life for herself. So given your strong feelings about the centrality of women asserting themselves, and that being, this book being a love letter to every woman who's dared to pursue her art, why is your central character a male?
Yes, it's a good question, isn't it? But he's the most flawed character in the book.
You're not getting off that easily, Heather.
I don't feel like I have a lot of control over my characters.
Okay.
Archie arrived and that's who it was. And I often thought about that as I went along. Why wasn't Jane the central character? People love Jane.
We'll come to Jane in a moment.
People love Jane. But he was a beautiful vehicle for the messiness of life. And to me, he represents, in many ways, the obtuse and often thoughtless and selfish way that we go about living our lives unaware of the impact we have on other people, especially those nearest and dearest to us. And I love the way I'm not going to give anything away here, but there's a moment on the Hudson where he has a revelation, a very, very subtle revelation. But I remember when he had that, I as the writer thought, oh, thank goodness you are starting to get it. Because so much of the book to me was about the sense that we live in a time where creativity is often devalued and certainly underfunded. And in Australia, it's seriously underfunded. And when I look at the impact that has on our children and on society, it deeply troubles me. And in some ways, both Lydia, Archie's wife, and Marina are such beautiful examples of the kind of courage and strength one has to have to live a creative life and to live it powerfully and certainly to live on a global stage. But it's a very, very difficult thing to do, and often we live at the impact of trying to be women in a construct that has suited men much better.
But at the same time, Archie is an artist. He is a creator. He's a composer, and throughout most of this book, he's stuck. He can't work anymore. He can't create, and I mean, you clearly have sympathy with him. So we're not setting male and female in contest against each other, or saying that one form of creativity is easier or more superior or anything like that. In fact, I think, although you say he's a messy character, I think you feel a great deal of sympathy for him when he suddenly realises he can no longer do what he's always done.
Yes, I loved that ambiguity, actually. I didn't mean that. I didn't feel like I was very in charge of that. My characters are very real for me, and it's one of the reasons that I've actually never tried to meet Marina, because I never went out of my way to interview her or have any connection with her, because she is a character and she's very powerful as a character to me. And the same with Archie. he's a creative. He's at the effect of his creative life. He hasn't had the creative life that he wanted to have. He isn't as successful in his own eyes as he feels he ought to have been. But so many of us are like that. So many of us never fulfill our dreams, and we never reach the kind of potential we thought we were capable of. And so I have enormous compassion for all of us in the creative world. I had less compassion for him as a husband.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's move on to Jane Miller. Jane, you say, is one of the most beloved of the characters in your book. She's a recently widowed art teacher from Georgia who comes to New York to observe Marina, but not to sit with her. And you have Jane saying, or maybe Jane said this without you, I'm not sure now. Jane says, had it been enough to sit on the sidelines, had she somehow missed an opportunity for something life-changing, some act of courage? So why didn't you have her sit?
She just didn't want to. I couldn't make her. She actually sat right there near my daughter's fabulous boots. She always sat there. I don't know why. She just didn't want to. And how many of you are here? I know there's one very famous person that's here who sat many, many times. How many of you here sat with Marina? This is Paco Blancas, who sat 21 times with Marina.
Is that the record?
And he inspired a character in the book, and I do hope you enjoy him. And I spoke very briefly with Paco during the performance. I don't know if you remember, but I asked you and how the performance was for you, and I think I've used your response in the book, so thank you.
I guess that's one of the interesting things about the book is the people who choose to observe and never make the effort to sit, and those who think they're going to observe, like Aki, who then suddenly decides he has to, so he actually sleeps in the street all night so he can be early in the line to get in, and even so has to wait 9 hours or something before he gets to sit. And I just found that an interesting situation where some people don't want to jump at life and some people are scared. And I'm going to come in a moment to why that might be. But another of the characters who to me is the most interesting of the characters is Britika, who you describe simply as the student. She's in fact Chinese, abandoned by her birth mother for reasons she'll never know, and adopted by a Dutch family in Amsterdam. She's writing a PhD on Marina, which is how she comes, and she flies across every couple of weeks to come and observe and also to sit. She's flamboyant, she has pink hair, she's a risk taker. When she gets to sit, she takes off her clothes and is immediately dragged off by the guards. So what were you trying to say with the student?
One of the striking things for me was how many young people came to The Artist is Present. How many young students, how many people studying art history, how many people studying, the history of performance art, the history of theatre. There were so many young people here, and they were not just from New York. They were from Los Angeles, from San Francisco. They were from universities in Europe. And so Britika really was, in a way, a sort of collage of the sort of conversations I had with those young people. And she was a delightful character to find, Britika, because she is young and she has different ideals and she has a different background and she observes the show very differently. She doesn't have that emotional richness that comes from people who are older, which I felt very much in Aki and in Jane. Instead, and even Helaeus, who's another character in the book, Britika is sort of naive and gung-ho, and she really is waiting for her place and her moment in life. So I loved her, and I loved how she is so decorative. And the photographs that Marco Anelli created for The Artist is Present, you can find them on the Flickr feed and you can find them on the MoMA site. They're the faces of all the people, nearly 1,600 people who sat opposite Marina. There were many like Britika, these young people, and then the cast on their faces they sat, the emotion that bubbled up for them, the depth of the experience was quite stunning to observe, and I know it shocked them what it was like to sit with her in a way that they had never experienced anything like that before. So she was a delightful person to also to reflect the career that Marina has had. You know, this is a woman who's been practicing since the early 70s, and that people do write PhDs about her, and they do study her work for years and years and years. And I really wanted to honour that this is an artist that, despite being a performance artist, which, let's face it, has seemed like the fringe of the art world for a very long time, Marina richly inhabits the central part of our artistic life through last century and this century, that she's a very powerful artist who's had an extraordinary influence on young people, older people, artists of all sorts. And I was really happy in a way that Britica somehow embodied that.
I love her. Finally, let's move on to Marina Abramovic herself, and let's talk about the woman of whom you say, like a true New York pioneer, she had bent the city to her will, and she'd done it through art, which I thought was a wonderful way of encapsulating this extraordinary event that occurred in this space over those 3 months in 2010. I just wonder why you felt you needed Marina's permission to make her the central character of your book. Why you couldn't have just done it?
I've felt it would be disrespectful to call a character Marina Abramovic. If someone wrote a book and they made a writer from Tasmania called Heather Rose with my backstory, I would want to have given my permission.
But you're not an artist. You're not a performance artist. You don't put your work out there in the public domain.
That's right.
In the way she does.
No, that's exactly right. I'm not. But nevertheless, I felt far too much respect for her to ever create a character called Marina Abramovic and not ask her permission. So it was a risk, because I was quite invested in this project by the time I realised she needed to be herself. And I just went out on a limb and asked. And it's such a good lesson, ask. And so often in life, if you ask the really hard questions, you get quite a different answer than you think you will, in my experience. And she said yes. And then I was very clear that I would keep sending drafts, and I know dear Giuliano received a number of drafts over the years to ensure that they understood that I really was still doing this project and that I was committed to it and that I wanted to have integrity.
So you allowed her to read the book before it was published?
It was always available. Where's Giuliano? Where's he going? Oh, there you are, darling. Sorry. I always sent it to Giuliano, and we always understood that she probably wouldn't, but it was always available to her. And then if she did have any feedback, she was welcome to give it to me. I don't know what I would have done if she'd had great ideas.
That's why you...
Oh.
What do I do here? This is too much, you know? And so she trusted her with unconditional.
That's really good to know. Thank you. I wish I'd known that earlier. That's beautiful. Thank you.
That's why you never ask. Now let's talk about you and Marina. You sat with her 4 times. Mm-hmm. Right here.
Right here.
In this space, 8 years ago. I was very interested in Com Toibin, the wonderful writer who also sat, and he wrote an article which I think was in the New York Times where he wrote of the experiences that this was serious, too serious maybe, too intimate, too searching. So Heather, tell us what it was like for you.
It was a very strange mix of the sacred and the secular. A long time ago, in my 20s, I spent a lot of time in America. I spent time in the Midwest with the Native American people doing ceremony, which is a whole story of itself. And there is a way that ceremony calls you to be present. It calls you to be present because the sweat lodges are too hot, or the sun is too hot, or the dance is too long, or your hunger and fatigue. and thirst is too extreme, and you have to learn to be present because it's the only way you can escape the pain of the experience. And when I sat with Marina and looked into her face, I thought, oh, you're in a lot of pain, and you have managed to harness something extraordinary to be here, to be with us. And her presence felt enormous. At that stage, this wasn't there. That screen is, it went right up to the 6th floor when the artist is present was here. So the atrium goes up to a skylight. And it felt like she occupied the whole space. So I sat down, I had that kind of awareness that I was in a ceremony. This was a ceremony, even though it was in an incredibly secular environment and it was under the guise of art. And I felt many things as I sat. Over the 4 times I sat with her, I had some very strange, surreal experiences where I actually felt like I was travelling in other realms. And I was also acutely aware of emotion coming and going that I had no way of explaining. And I remember at one point realising that there were tears running down my face, although I couldn't say why. And I think that happened several times, and it happened a great deal to the people who sat. There was something so magical about being witnessed, being seen, and seeing her. And Marina is a magnetic person. She's got a huge energy, and she's worked very, very hard in her life to learn the skill of sitting and being present with people. And that was a healing, I think, for a lot of people. And I came away each time thinking, there is something going on in the atrium. I cannot say what it is, but it's beyond normal, and it's something to do with the spiritual. And I can't say more than that.
I'd like to just pick up on something you said just then, and that is about the pain. I found your descriptions of the artist is present throughout the book quite remarkable and a very worthy record of Marina's performance. But what struck me most was how you forced us to confront what it cost her physically. You describe it very powerfully. You say, we see Marina's stillness, her gaze, her focus, and inside a war has begun. All those systems trying to function while she remains motionless. Now, she sat there for 7 long hours every day, 6 days a week, for 3 months. During that time, her legs swell, her ribs sink into her organs. She loses 7 kilograms, which is around 17 pounds. She's aged 62. Was this the most remarkable thing about that performance, the pain?
I think for me, the gift that she gave us by the suffering that she went through allowed a lot of people to have some kind of awakening in themselves. And we haven't got enough written records of what happened when people sat.
The martyrs.
Yeah. What did you say?
The martyrs.
The martyrs. Yes. All I know is that when I looked over and over and over again at the faces that Marco and Ellie captured for us, they are expressions on people's faces that I've never seen on people's faces before. They're the sort of expression that you might get from a lover in a moment of intimacy, be that grief or joy or elation or ecstasy. But you rarely, if ever, see it on the face of a complete stranger. And yet we had the privilege of having that captured over and over and over again. And it's really, it was such a gift. So while I was aware of Marina's suffering, what I was really aware of was the gift she was giving everybody who came. And of course, it's not just the people who sat. Every day, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Over 850,000 people came from all over the world to witness this performance. And there were floods of people coming in at any time. Sometimes it would empty out. It's so strange to be here, I have to say, as I talk about it. It would empty out sometimes, and there might only be, 30 or 50, and then it would be full, and it would be full right back to the glass balustrades and all the way back to the end of the room, and all the balustrades, they would be full of people looking down. So you didn't have to sit to be deeply impacted. In fact, sometimes I think the people who sat on the sidelines were getting just as much, if not more, from the experience of watching other human beings having something otherworldly happen to them. And it was art.
So finally, tonight was going to be the first time that you were going to have a real conversation with Marina, because you've only met her once, very fleetingly, and I think you'd had a few drinks. You just got the publishing deal. You're entitled. Yes. But the point is, you'd never had a real conversation with this woman about whom you had written this remarkable book. So if Marina had been able to be here tonight, what was the one question you most wanted to ask her?
I wanted to ask her, what was the practice over all the years since she was a child and wanted to be an artist, and now where she's got to now, what was the single most powerful practice in her life that had helped sustain her?
Well, thank you, Heather. Thank you, everybody. And it's now your opportunity to ask Heather a question. There are people with roving mics in the room, so if you'd like to ask a question, perhaps put your hand up and the mic will come to you. And please feel free to ask Heather anything at all. Who's going to be first? Yes, thank you.
Heather Rose, what is it like to be sitting in this chair here after all this time and this journey? What's it like?
This is my friend Tina from Melbourne. She's the mother of my godson standing beside her. It actually feels really normal. It's very strange how comfortable I feel here. And as soon as I love New York, this is my 5th or 6th time coming to New York, and every time I arrive here I feel like I'm coming to my other home. And I thought I would be a lot more nervous sitting here in the Atrium, but actually I've spent quite a lot of time here, as has Marina, obviously. So the fact that she's not here tonight, it would be easy to be very disappointed, but actually I'm just deeply sad for her that she's so unwell. And I really want us all to keep her in our hearts, because she's having a really hard time at the moment. And it would take, I know from everything I've researched about Marina, that it would take a great deal to stop her fulfilling a commitment. And that says, everything to me that she's not here tonight. So I'm excited. I'm delighted. I'm very touched by all of you being here. Many of you I don't know, and I do hope I get to know you. And it's utterly delightful. This book, all the books, this is my 7th, as Anne said, and I literally have just finished writing my 8th back in Australia. Books are like children. Some of them are introverts and some of them are extroverts, and they're all like shark babies. They just go out into the world and they do their own thing. But this one has been the most extroverted of all. It's been translated into a number of languages now, and the fact that it's finally come home to New York, where it was born, to the Atrium where it was born, that's magic. So it's magical to be here tonight with you all.
Yes.
When you mentioned you have no control over your characters, I'm curious if you could elaborate on that and more about the relationship between your work with creation and the muse work with creation.
Thank you. I'm very interested in imagination. It's actually one of the things that I've started to teach back in Australia. It's a mystical process, I don't know how many of you are writers here. I suspect there are a few of you in the room. Writers. Yes, they reluctantly admit themselves. All my life, characters have turned up vividly. They come almost like a scene in a movie, and they come with their own personalities, their own backstories, the clothes they wear, the way they express themselves. Early on, I really wanted them to act in ways that I thought they ought to. My second novel is called The Butterfly Man, and it's based on the disappearance of Lord Lucan, the British lord, the only British lord at that point in 1974, to be accused of murder. Some of you will know the story. The nanny was killed in the downstairs kitchen of their West One apartment, and Lord Lucan was never seen again. And the book is about what happened to Lord Lucan. It's the last year of his life, and we follow him through the seasons, and he's in Tasmania, and I wanted him to come to terms with what had happened in the past. It's 20 years after the crime had occurred. I wanted to know if he really did murder the nanny or whether he was innocent and had been set up. More than anything, I wanted him to come to a sense of peace. And I had to let go of all of that. I just had to let him die with his own experience of life. And it was then I realised that the real trick as a writer is to get out of the way and not interfere with them and not have opinions about them. And that's why Archie is a very ambiguous character, I think, because he's probably the character I've interfered with least of all. You know, this book it took 11 years. I had a lot of time to refine it, and it just feels better when you let them go. My new book that I've just finished, the main character actually is an Australian who lives in the East Village and goes back to Tasmania for a job. She does things that I just would never agree with. And it's made me laugh out loud, and it's shocked me. And they're highly entertaining. It's like having a movie going in my head all the time. I always think writing and madness are not very far apart. So I'm very grateful that the voices in my head are productive, and they let me sleep.
You can put them on the page.
Yeah, put them on the page, that's right.
Yes. Yes. Just wait for
The microphone's coming.
We have something in common. The very first night I spent in the United States, in New York City, I slept in the Chelsea Hotel.
Oh! Do you remember what your room looked like?
Yeah, and I remember all these faces peeping out at me. I had the family with me when we were just walking up the stairs. So yeah, I remember that. And
it was a very exotic place, wasn't it?
It's an exotic place,
Yes.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And every room was different. I've stayed there a number of times, and I remember one time they showed me up to my room, and it had long electric blue shag pile carpet and bright swirly orange velvet wallpaper, and I went, oh no, I can't sleep in this room. Could you give me another one, please? There was a very... I think it's opening, but of course they've ruined it, haven't they? They've destroyed all the...
Turning into apartments, I think.
Yes,
I think.
yes, sadly.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes. The mic's coming.
This is Laura Godwin, who is the publisher of my children's series here from Holt. So it's beautiful to have you here, Laura.
Thank you for having me. When you write, do you ever think about the reader and how the reader might feel about your characters or what happens, or do you just write to entertain yourself?
I was...
Or not entertain, but I mean...
Yes, no, it's
right.
a really important question, and it's a question, it's a subject I talk a lot with my students at the university about. I was trained as a copywriter. I started out as a journalist, writing columns. I wrote sailing columns for the local newspaper. I live in a town of just 120,000 people, so our local paper's pretty small, and it's the sort of paper that has, the lost dog on the front Sorry, this is going live to Hobart, but that's true. We all know it. And it's a small town, and some, small stories become very big sometimes. But I wrote a sailing column many years ago about windsurfing and sailing articles for that paper, and then I fell into advertising after I'd been travelling for a few years. And the trick with advertising, of course, is that you must always keep your reader reading right down to the brand in the bottom right-hand corner. So I was highly trained to think about my audience. When I was writing my first 2 novels in my 20s, neither of which I even attempted to get published, I was aware that my writing was very tight. It was like bad knitting, and it was misformed and awkward, partly because of the struggle of me wanting to write something I wanted to write, the characters wanting to be who they wanted to be, and then thinking of the audience, thinking of the audience, thinking of the audience. And now I don't so much craft the story to suit the audience, but I do work very, very hard to make sure the sentences communicate what I'm trying to say, and that the dialogue, that's the hardest thing, I think, in literature, is to get the dialogue right. And I craft the dialogue endlessly so that it feels genuinely like a conversation, and yet it conveys what the story needs it to convey. So there's an enormous amount of craft. I really love the editing process. I love that once the plot is down and the characters are sorted and the first draft is done, and the many other drafts. But the craft, I think, I like to read my work aloud, because it helps me understand how a reader would hear it. And then I tend to put my manuscripts away for periods of time. This book was put away for nearly a year between drafts at times, and then I get it out and I can feel like a reader again. So I think it's incredibly important as writers that we don't... Fine, write for yourself if you want to write for yourself. But if you're going to write for an audience, you really have to think about how that information is going to be received, and have you communicated effectively.
It's time for one more question. Okay. Oh, okay, 2. Try and keep it...
Hi.
Hello.
So what did you learn about cultivating a lifelong practice of art while writing this book?
Wow, that's a big... Discipline, commitment, fearlessness. So I'm sitting with Marina, the 3rd time I sat with her. So the very first time I sat down, I went into some kind of immersive space where things got very surreal, and after some period of time, I kind of came back out of it again, and I got up and left and went out back to that back wall there. It was only that night or the next night when I checked the Flickr feed, they'd kept the time on everyone's photograph, so how long you sat. I thought that I'd sat maybe for 16 minutes, that was my thinking, and in fact I'd sat for 46 minutes. So the 3rd time I'm sitting with Marina across the table, and by now I'd had the meeting with Sean Kelly, and I'd asked him if Marina might consider it, and he said, yes, send her an email. I'm sitting with her and I'm suddenly like, oh, I should telepathically ask her if she would be a character in the book, because this is a pretty strange experience, and who says she can't hear me, So I'm sort of like, Marina, I've never told this story publicly, let me tell you. Marina, I'm writing a book. I'd really like you to be the character in the book. What do you think about that? Do you think you might say yes if I ask you to be a character in the book? And Marina, as you may notice in photographs, is mostly sitting back in her chair because she's trying to be comfortable, yeah? She's got a pillow at her back and she's trying to be comfortable, so she's in the gaze. And she very rarely moved. I asked that question and I nearly jumped out of my skin. She leaned right forward in her chair right then, and it was as if she sent a lightning bolt into my head, and I could hear her voice, and she said, "You must do it, but you must be fearless." And when I got home, I told my co-author of the children's books, we write together under the pen name of Angelica Banks. This is Danielle Wood, my dearest, dearest, dearest friend. And I told Danielle that story, and she has beautiful handwriting, and she got a big bit of white card and she wrote it in blood red ink and put it above my writing desk. You must do it, but you must be fearless, and it's probably a rule for life as well.
Final question.
Davini.
Dear Heather, I've been pondering, I've never asked you this question. Are you able to let go of your characters, all of them, all of their journeys, once you're done, once the book's gone to the edit, once those baby sharks have swum off into the big ocean? Or do you keep dreaming and feeling into the movies and to the heart of their lives, into the future? Because I haven't been able to let go of those characters, and I read your book a few years ago, so I wonder for you as the writer, what happens?
I actually tend to do a little bit of a ceremony at some point and let them go, because they're very vivid. And I know the book is nearly done when I start to have conversations with them standing at the sink, and they're almost visceral. They're so real for me. And my children know this, because I get very vague, and my whole family knows this. I get very vague as the books get more finished, because I'm living with it's almost like, you know, half of my life is invisible, but it's entirely visible to me. And I remember with Lord Lucan, he was really hard to let go of. In a way, they're like old lovers. You have great affection for them. Some of them were a bit tricky, but you have affection for them because you shared life and you shared love and you shared experience. They get further in the past, but they're very precious to me. And interestingly, I don't know if other writers have this experience, but I often get readers asking me years and years later how those characters are going. And there's a little boy in The Butterfly Man, and a number of people. That book was published in 2005, and still only 6 months ago, someone stopped me and asked me if I thought the little boy in the book had grown up and had a successful life. Was he doing okay? And I said, yes, I'm sure he is. But it's a very strange thing. They obviously go on in other people's lives too, and they're always very dear to me, but they don't keep growing up. I don't think about Charlie as having grown up to me. He's still 6, like he is in the book. And Marina is alive, and she is a vivid human being in the world. So there's always going to be the character Marina and the real Marina. And maybe one day they'll meet, I don't know. But yes, they are very precious to me, and they're adventures that I've taken, just like travel.
Well, thank you, Heather. Before I ask Elizabeth to come and do the final wrap-up, I think you would like to say a few thank yous to people.
Yes. Thank you all for being here. I do really want to make just a few particular thank yous to my beautiful community. I read this lovely... I watched Barack Obama talk about community on a video a couple of days ago, and he said how the most important thing is to have a community, because that's what you draw strength from. And there are 28 people here tonight who came from Australia, from Europe, and some in New York City to be here tonight. So I'm so, so grateful for my community. And I live on an island. I live on Tasmania. It's a population of 500,000 people. We are the New Mexico of Australia. We are artists and creators and writers and dreamers. And it's an extraordinary population to be part of. So I'm so grateful to my community in Tasmania. And I can't tell you how surprised I am when all those people decided to come. I would have been surprised if 8 people came. As I've said, I am very concerned for Marina's well-being, and I just send her all my love, because I understand what it's like to have a serious illness and how difficult that makes any kind of planning. I really want to thank her for agreeing to be part of this book, to be a character in this book. It's been such a gift to me. The writing itself was a gift to me. The learning about her life was a gift to me. And now everything that's happened since the book became a book in the world. I want to thank Glenn Lowry, who was here earlier, the director of MoMA, who made this extraordinary event happen. And I also want to thank all the staff here at MoMA who've been so generous in looking after us. Thank you so much. I want to also acknowledge Catherine Andrews, my friend in Melbourne, who put all of this in place. One day at a dinner in Melbourne, I hadn't known Catherine very long, but she asked me what I wanted to do for the launch, and this was not long after my conversation with Giuliano, and I said I'd really love it to have it at MoMA, and she said, leave it with me. And everything else happened from there. So I'm so grateful to Catherine Andrews. Her husband is Daniel Andrews, who's just been re-elected as the Premier of Victoria, so we are all delighted about that too. I want to thank Elizabeth Charlotte, who took this book on, who was handed this book at the Frankfurt Book Fair and told it was the book for her. And she has taken it on, and I'm so grateful, Elizabeth, and to have you here tonight and for all the love and support of Algonquin and the whole team, Carla, and it's been Abby and Michael who are here tonight. It's been a delightful experience. I really love this edition. This is the same cover as we have going around the world. The Greek edition has this, the Australian edition has this, the UK edition has this, and now the US edition has this. And it's a marvellous, marvellous design. I'm so grateful to the designer for making such a magnificent, magnificent cover for us. And I also want to thank David Walsh and Mary Lanzard from MoMA. We have a little gallery in Tasmania, which is our Bilbao. It's called the Museum of Old and New Art, and David Walsh is the owner and creator of that gallery. He gave me a writing studio to work on the final draft of this novel, and his librarian, Mary Lanzard, was a wonderful, wonderful source of information and helped me do a lot of research. My 84-year-old father came from Tasmania for this event. His name is Kevin Rose, and he is sitting beside my beautiful sister Melinda Rose, who accompanied him and made it possible for him to come because he needed an emergency nurse to come with him. But he was determined to come. He's been my greatest support all my life. When I was 6 years old and a prodigious reader already, he took me into the adult section of our local library in Hobart, and he pulled a tiny, slender volume off the shelf, the first time I'd ever been allowed to go into the adult section of the library, and he handed me The Old Man and the Sea. And it changed my life. It made me understand. I already knew I wanted to be a writer, but when I read The Old Man and the Sea and that spoiler alert, last scene with the marlin on the beach broke my heart when I was 6. And I thought, oh, writing just doesn't take you places, it makes you feel things. And that's the sort of writer I want to be. So, Dad, thank you. Anne Summers. Anne Summers is a great Australian, one of our greatest writers and thinkers, a passionate feminist, someone who's been a role model for all women in Australia. And I am so in awe that she has been the person who's interviewed me. When Anne Summers interviews people in Australia, it's front page news. And Anne was offered... when she first learned that I was going to have the launch in New York, she said, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. So yesterday, when I found out the news, I was like, oh, now I know why that happened. See, there's a convergence. Yeah, there's a convergence. Anne and I met really briefly at Sydney Writers' Festival only at the beginning of the year, I think. Yeah, 2 years ago, yes. And then here we are. Anne has moved to New York and, again, come back to New York. And here she is tonight. So thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for being you. You are remarkable and magnificent. Thank you. Giuliano, my dear friend, hi. Thank you. Your love and generosity and support and your delight in life is such a beautiful thing to share with you. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, darling. And Alison too. Thank you all the team. You've been magnificent and it's been so helpful over the years. David Baliano, I don't know if David is here, but he appears in the book, as does Marco Anelli, who took the photographs. They both agreed to be themselves. Paco, I've already mentioned you. You inspired a character in the book. Thank you so much. And Sean Kelly, of course, who was so helpful to me. And my dear friends who are here from the Stella Prize. In Australia, we have a women's prize for literature. It's a prize for the best fiction or non-fiction book in Australia in any year. And it's called the Stella Prize. It's named after Stella Maria Miles Franklin, the chairman of the Stella Board, and the Paula, Rob and Sari, who are sitting in the front row here, have come all the way from Australia as part of the Stella Prize team to be with me here tonight. And I'm so grateful. The book won the Stella Prize in 2017, and it changed my life because it brought the book to public acclaim in a way that would never have happened otherwise. I'd had 6 novels before that had very fond readers, but had never reached mainstream media. So I'm so grateful, so grateful, and it's just beautiful to have you all here tonight. It means the world to me. Thank you so much.
Heather.
And lastly, could Byron and Belle and Alex just come up for me? These are my 3 children. These 3, I've spent 30 years having magnificent adventures, hilarious adventures, delightful adventures. We have focused our lives on creativity in our family, and that has meant a lot of very interesting Lego, very interesting art, very interesting books. The house has always been full of books and music and laughter and film and more art and clothing and fashion design. It's been a hive of industry, and now they are all out in the world. Alex lives in San Francisco now. Byron is in Sydney, and Isabel is with me but is going to fly the nest next year. So these 3 people, you know, to be a writer, you need a lot of love and support if you are going to really embrace and deepen into yourself and who you might become through the artistic process. Could you hold that, the paper? And these 3 people have caused me to have adventures I would never have had otherwise, and they have made my life rich beyond measure. You are all my best stories. Thank you.
I've known Heather through the Stella Prize, and I was with her the night that she won the 2017 Stella Prize, and saw her recently in September, and it was only a day or two after she found out that the event was going to be here at MoMA tonight. And as soon as she told me, I said, Heather, I have to come. And the chair of the Stella Prize walked in shortly after, and I told her, and she also said, we have to go to New York. This is really quite an extraordinary achievement for an Australian writer, but also for any writer. To have your book, the first novel, launched at MoMA is something pretty special.
Well, this is my very good friend, who I don't know if is on camera, there she is, that we went to mime school together. And she said, do you want to see this friend of mine? She released a book at the MoMA, and I said, sure, and that's why I'm here. I came in blindly, but I left incredibly inspired.
Well, my friend Davini introduced me to Heather, and I heard a lot about the book from Heather herself when we had dinner the other night, and I know Marina's work as well, so I was really curious as to what this would be like.
So Heather sent my husband an invitation to come to New York for her book launch, and it was a lovely invitation. So we decided, as an act of spontaneity, to come over for 6 nights, and so we're going back tomorrow, but it's been absolutely fabulous and we've thoroughly enjoyed every minute.
I've known Heather for over 20 years, and I think she must have been in her formative writing stage when I used to drop in and have a chat, every few weeks of an afternoon, and she had little kids then, and one of the things that, I lost contact with her recently, but one of the things that's amazing is to see these little kids suddenly being absolutely, full-on adults and unrecognisable.
Why am I here? Can't believe why I'm here. Well, I love Heather Rose from the bottom of my heart, and so when she said, would you like to come to New York and hang out and do this gig, I've said of course. I couldn't think of anything better. So it's been glorious to see her in her full light and full magnificence. It's been an absolute privilege.
I came here tonight because I heard wonderful things about the book. I'm so excited that it's the first novel in the MoMA as well. It's just incredible.
My lovely friend Erica here brought me. I'm an artist and a photographer, so I know I've always read books, and it's great to hear a new perspective on writing.
My friend Erica also brought me here, and I'm from Australia, so I wanted to see local artists speak about expression and art, and it's very cool to be in the MoMA.
I'm just really inspired by tonight, and I think it's incredible just for her as a writer to put that much effort into something, and just the way she talked about her work, not as she's creating these characters, but they live on, and how she described her process and her writing. I think it's really inspiring for anyone, and it's inspiring for someone listening to it, and it's respectable as someone admiring her. Yeah.
What brought me here was Heather herself. She's a dear friend, she's a magnificent woman, she's a brilliant writer, and how could you not want to celebrate someone who is living and doing something that she's lived for 11 years, and now it's sitting at MoMA, and we're in the Atrium where the book was about. This is spectacular. Yeah.
So I've come along tonight. I've come all the way from Australia at Heather's invitation. She's a very, very old friend of mine and fellow creative. And when she asked me if I'd come or not, I just had to be here. I fell in love with the book when I read it a couple of years ago. The characters still live in my heart, and it's a spectacular opportunity to be here, probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm incredibly proud of her.
What brought me here tonight was I'm Heather's publicist. This was one of the first books that I worked on at Algonquin. I recently started this job, and it's been a dream to work with such an amazing author. I just met Heather yesterday, but we've been corresponding for a while. And working on this amazing book and seeing this event come together and being a part of such a memorable book launch has really been a gift and a dream. I never thought I'd be doing a book launch at the MoMA, but I'm just so happy to be a part of this publication.
This was fascinating. The whole evening was fascinating. She's fascinating. The whole idea is, and I'm buying not only one book for myself, it's a surprise, but I'm buying one for my sister for Christmas. And she probably isn't going to see this unless it's on CBS or NBC or New York One. Anyway, I love the evening. Thank you so much for having it here, and this is wonderful. So, cheers. Happy New Year, everybody.
Well, Heather Rose and I have been friends for nearly 20 years now, and we've written 3 books together. So if you think I was going to miss the launch at MoMA of the Museum of Modern Art, that was never going to happen.
Well, I'm here because I have 2 precious daughters. One of them has written a marvellous book, and she's written others. But the lovely thing that I find about it is her great friend Daniel Wood, and also her many friends from both in Melbourne and in Tasmania are here as well. So thank you all who have supported Heather in this such a marvellous way. I pinch myself at times. I am Heather's dad, and had so much joy and pleasure, not only from Heather, but also from my beautiful nurse who's caring for me. And I love them all. The whole families that I have, Heather's families, so precious to me. Love you. And my parting words is, love one another.